Hello everyone, we're about to get started. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to get logged in and ready to go. We'll go ahead and start talking about just some kind of housekeeping things until then, while people go ahead and join. So we are currently in week 4. Definitely want to take a second to tell you guys, good job. You guys are doing really great, and we're officially at the halfway point after we finish our lecture today. So hang in there, and we'll definitely push through and get the semester wrapped up. In week 4, if you've been in the week 4 folder, which I hope you have already, there's our weekly checklist. You have your second exam and chapters 8 and 9 and inquisitive. Remember, if you do chapter 8, I will give you that participation grade for chapter 9. And I have already updated those chapter 7 participation grades in inquisitive. So if for some reason your participation grade is not what you think it should be, please send me an email. I also have really enjoyed talking with some of you on the midpoint check-in, so thank you very much for replying to that email. It's good to get some feedback and just kind of see that you guys are doing well and that you're keeping up with the material and that the lecture format is working for most of you. The Chapter 8 lecture video is posted. I'll, of course, post this video under Chapter 9 slides as soon as we're finished. I did see that Eric had emailed me some questions on Exam 2. I will send emails back to you, Eric, as soon as we finish our lecture today, so just hang with me there, and I'll go ahead and let you know what's going on with those. So today we're going to cover Chapter 9, that's Savings Interest Rates in the Market for Loanable Funds, and I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that PowerPoint. If you do have any questions about any general information or about last week or anything like that, please feel free to go ahead and type those in the comment box, and I will go back to those whenever we have a break for a moment. Okay, so Chapter 9. This chapter goes pretty smoothly with Chapter 8. Obviously, they flow together. Last lecture, we talked about CPI. So remember, CPI is the Consumer Price Index, and this is going to be the foundation of inflation calculation. Basically, what that means is that the CPI allows us to calculate changes in inflation from year to year. We talked about how computing this CPI can be a little bit difficult because our basket of consumer goods is going to change over time, and how the Bureau of Labor Statistics goes ahead and adjusts for this and makes changes to that as necessary. We also talked about how the general public typically will misunderstand inflation. And we talked about whenever you get a raise that you need to make sure that it's actually a raise in real terms, not just in nominal terms. We talked about the macroeconomic costs of inflation. And we also talked about what causes inflation. So those controlled expansions of the money supply and things like that. So that was all from last lecture. You guys did a really good job answering those questions, so I don't think that we're going to have a lot of new ones. But let's go ahead and jump into the new material. So this chapter really all ties back to our basic supply and demand concepts. The big questions here we're going to ask ourselves and answer are, 1, what is the loanable funds market? We're going to ask what factors shift the supply of loanable funds, what factors are going to shift the demand for loanable funds, and how do we apply this loanable funds market? Now, whenever they're saying how do we apply this, what they mean is how can we use this? What kind of information can we take away from this? So we'll use kind of those basic supply and demand concepts and just kind of apply them in a different way. Now, the loanable funds market, this is not a single physical location. It's going to include a lot of different places. Some of these are going to be stock markets, investment banks, mutual fund firms, and commercial banks. In this chapter, we'll see that this market is very important. Most businesses really can't fund capital and other investment purchases with just cash alone. A lot of large purchases are going to be particularly difficult to fund with cash because a lot of businesses don't just have a lot of excess cash laying around. Without the loanable funds market, a lot of investment would be impossible, and production and GDP would be a lot lower because businesses wouldn't be able to expand, they wouldn't be able to invest in new technology and things like that. So the loanable funds market allows businesses to get the loans that they need to have those large amounts of capital to go out and make big purchases. This graphic right here is just kind of showing you how savings moves into the loanable funds market and gets out to borrowers. So savings is going to flow into the market for loanable funds, and it's going to be translated into loans. Savers, so this is going to be households or foreign entities, they save their money. The money that they save goes into this loanable funds market in the form of banks, bonds, and stocks. And then these banks, sell bonds, companies sell stocks, things like that, which becomes loans, and their borrowers are going to be firms or the government. So on the left side, we have the supplier of funds. Again, that's going to be households and foreign entities. Foreign entities can include both private citizens and governments that decide to save inside of the United States. Household savings is going to be in the form of retirement accounts, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. These are also going to be big sources of loanable funds. And then over on the right side, we have the demanders of loanable funds, which are going to be businesses, firms, and governments. So firms are going to demand borrowed funds to finance their big expenses, like we talked about before. And these can be things like capital purchases or business expansions. So to reinforce the importance of this market, we want to consider, why does borrowing take place? We know that firms are going to borrow to invest. So in other words, firms are looking to produce an output in the future, and they're going to have to borrow to pay those expenses to invest in that output today. Without borrowing, again, they might not be able to, invest in this production, and it would greatly end up hurting the macroeconomy. So the chart on this slide, we saw this in the previous chapter, but a different part of that figure is going to be emphasized here. So before anything is produced in the factory, the firm has to invest, and that's way over here on this left side. Firms are going to have to borrow before they can begin production, and that's why this market is so important, because if firms aren't able to borrow, then none of these things can happen that are on this right side of this line. So some notes about borrowing. In order for gross domestic product, which is output and production, to grow, there has to be investment. Investment typically will require borrowing because, again, firms do not have that cash flow available. And in order for firms to be able to borrow, someone else has to be saving. Without savings, future production is not going to be sustainable, and the ability to tap into that savings is very important. If firms want to borrow to buy resources to produce goods, somebody has to save. So we're going to talk about who's saving, where it's coming from, and how it's getting pushed out. I'm going to go ahead and just pop up the rest of the slide, but it's basically just kind of reiterating what I've already told you. Lenders can't give out money that they don't have, and savings is going to provide those funds for lenders to give out. So this next slide is all about interest rates. I'm going to go ahead and pop up the whole slide so we can talk about it. The interest rate, this is the price of loanable funds. So for savers, the interest rate is your reward for saving. Whenever you have a savings account or a CD or any type of investment that acquires interest, that's your reward for keeping that money in savings. And for borrowers, that interest rate that you pay, this is the cost of borrowing. So like we've talked about before, whenever you go and get a car loan, if you're wanting to buy a $10,000 car and you're getting a car loan, you're not only paying back the $10,000, you're paying back the $10,000 in principal plus interest. And that interest that you're paying is your cost of being able to borrow. So a lot of people thinking about retirement, buying a house or a car or any other big purchase, they start to get a little bit worried about fluctuations in the interest rate, and they really don't have a clear understanding as to why, interest rates will go up or go down. And again, this interest rate is just that price of the loanable funds. So if you know how to use supply and demand and you understand supply and demand, you'll really start to be able to understand and determine what is going to make interest rates go up and down. And that's something that you can definitely use in your personal life whenever you're making large purchases or considering saving, anything like that. So this is figure 9.3 for your book. I'm going to go ahead and show you this first curve is going to be the savings curve. So this is going to be the supply side. This horizontal axis here is going to be savings and investment in billions of dollars, and the vertical axis is going to be interest rates. Now, it's worth noting here that this is going to be the long-term real interest rate. The distinction between this and other types of interest rates is going to be made later on in the course, but just kind of keep in mind this is the long-term interest rate. So the savings curve is going to represent the supply of loanable funds. That's what's popped up right here already. This curve is going to have a positive slope. And remember, with supply, that indicates that the more that you save, the higher your quantity of loanable funds becomes, and the higher the interest rate is. So what that means in kind of simplified terms is that people are going to earn a higher rate of return the higher their savings are. A good way to think about that is if you have, $10 in a savings account that earns interest, you're not going to earn as much interest money as somebody that has $10,000 in that same account earning interest. Now the second click, this is showing that investment curve, and this is going to be the demand of loanable funds by borrowers. So this is firms and government that are demanding those funds. This curve has a negative slope because it's indicating that the quantity of loanable funds demanded increases as the interest rate decreases and the cost of borrowing falls. So you can see here, as that interest rate is lower, around 4%, you're going to have more people that are demanding loans that want loans. And as that interest rate is higher, you're going to have less people that want loans because it's going to be more expensive to borrow. And again, there's an inverse relationship here because obviously on the savings side, if you're a saver, you're going to want this higher interest rate. There's going to be a higher demand of investment. Now for the supply or the consumer side, you're not going to want to get a loan if the interest rate's really high. You're going to prefer loans with low interest rates. And this is just like the typical supply and demand that we've covered. So just try to kind of apply those concepts as you're thinking through these, and it makes this chapter a lot easier to understand. And then just to kind of pop up on the right side, it's just kind of giving you that simple explanation of what we've already talked about. So in your slides, this all will just show at once, and it's kind of what it looks like. This is a really good kind of metric to keep for yourself when you're doing your assignments and working on your exam review and exam, because it's just kind of a really simplified graphic. And as always, that point where those two curves meet would be that perfect equilibrium point. So in this case, it's an interest rate of 5% and savings and investment of about $250 billion. So just for a real simple example. We're not going to look at this clip. If you want it, office clips are always good. Let me know. I'll send it to you. This next slide talks about interest rates and the supply of loanable funds. So remember, that's going to be people that are saving. So if you have a positive balance in either your checking or savings account, you're a supplier in the loanable funds market. So think about that. How does that make you part of the loanable funds market? Well, for savers, if you're earning interest, the interest rate is going to be your reward. And every dollar that you save today is going to return more in the future when that interest rate is positive. And obviously, the higher that interest rate is, the greater your returns are going to be in the future, and the more motivated you're going to be to save, which is going to increase the loanable funds supply. So this is why, even though inflation decreases money's worth over time, money that you put into savings and hold on to is typically going to be worth more later. And that's only true if you're saving that money and earning interest on that money saved. So it does talk about the law of supply here, which basically just says that the quantity of savings is going to rise whenever the interest rate rises as well. And the example they give here, we have an interest rate of 3% per year. And if you save $500 times that 3%, remember we have to move that decimal 2 places to the left, you're going to make $15. And what that means is that saving $15 or $500 will pay you $15 for the year. So just to give you like a really simple broken down example of how you earn money on savings, there it is. So higher interest rates are obviously going to yield greater future returns. The table on this slide is going to represent the future value of $500 in savings at different interest rates. So for example, if you have $500 for 1 year at an interest rate of 6%, this is going to give you $530 the next year. And that's this third line right here on this chart. And the way they did that was $500 times 0.06, or plus 0.06 times 500, and that's going to give you $530. So this is something that you should have done in a lot of your other simple math classes and lower math classes. If you are having trouble calculating those percent increases, please send me an email and we can definitely work some of those out together. But just remember, all they're doing is multiplying the $500 initial savings balance times that interest rate and then adding that back to your $500 of principal. So for example, $500 times 0.04 is going to give you $20, and 500 plus $20 is 520. And that's what they've done all the way down this slide. So if you can find a bank that's going to pay you 10% interest, which is this bottom example here, you would end up with $550 after just 1 year of saving. The higher the interest rate, the more inclined you're going to be to save, because that's a positive incentive. And it's kind of the loanable version, or loanable funds version of the law of supply. Again, the quantity of saving is going to rise with the interest rate. The more reward that's in it for us in interest rate earnings, the more likely we are to leave that money alone and not spend it on something else. We're not going to do this activity for a long time. I'm going to go ahead and pop up the questions to ask and give you guys, since we're obviously not in class to work together, about 5 minutes to work this out. Feel free to kind of discuss if you have any questions or comments in the comment box. And then here at about 2:20, I'll go ahead and discuss what you've put in the comment box and kind of where we're at with this. But basically, we have Justin, who's considering buying a new golf cart. The golf cart costs $4,000, and he is expected to earn $1,600 per year for the next 4 years by shuttling students to and from the parking lots in class, particularly during stormy weather. So we want to know, what is the expected rate of return on the investment for Justin? And if Justin can get a $4,000 loan from his bank at 10% interest, should he purchase this cart? So for that expected rate of return, just to give you a little hint here, you would take that $1,600 that he's expecting to earn per year divided by that $4,000 purchase price. So when you break that down and turn it into a percentage, that's going to give you the percentage return per year. And then you just need to figure out if that percentage return that he's going to earn is higher than that 10% interest that he's paying. So again, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, go ahead and type them in the box, and we'll give you guys until about 2:20 or 2:21 to start talking about what answers you've provided. All right, I see a couple of correct answers coming in already, so we're going to go ahead and talk about this. For the expected rate of return, we take $1,600 divided by $4,000, and that gives us 0.4 or 40%. In this case, 40% expected rate of return is higher than the 10% interest that he'll be paying on the loan. So in this case, yes, he should go ahead and purchase the cart because his expected rate of return is going to be higher than the cost of borrowing, which is in this case going to be the 10% on the $4,000 loan. So wonderful job. You guys kind of working through that. And there's going to be some similar things like this that come up, but that was a really good first try. Moving on, I have another practice what you know. So where does the supply of funds in the loanable market come from? I'll give you guys a second to go ahead and answer that question before we move on. Very good. You guys are getting very quick at this, and the correct answer is going to be D. So the supply of loanable funds comes from consumers saving money at their banks. So great job. That is where that comes from. Now, the next slide talks about interest rates as a cost of borrowing. Remember the example that you just did with the golf cart. The cost of borrowing in that case was 10%. This is the demand side of the loanable funds market. Oh, too fast, sorry. So higher interest rates are going to mean that a firm is going to have to pay more to borrow. You should only borrow if you expect a greater return on your investment than the loan costs. So for example, at an interest rate at 6%, a firm would only want to borrow if they can expect to make more than a 6% return with their use of the funds. And as the interest rate falls, the quantity of loans that are demanded is going to rise because obviously the lower the cost of borrowing is, the more likely that your return is going to be higher than that cost. And this is going to kind of demonstrate that inverse relationship between the interest rate and the quantity demanded of loans that's going to be embedded in that downward sloping demand curve. So remember, because that demand curve slopes down, the lower the interest rate is, the more firms are going to want to borrow. Now, the interest rate can be thought of what? Here's you another practice what you know. And remember, we're looking at this from the demand side. So from the firm side that is borrowing, what can we think of the interest rate as? Again, you guys are so quick and accurate. So the price of money. Interest rates are the cost of borrowing. It's the price of the money. It's what we're having to pay to get money to make expansions. So let me go ahead and pop this whole slide up, and then we will talk about what it says. Now, savers and borrowers are going to care about the real rate of interest on a loan. Just like nominal versus real GDP, nominal versus real earnings, all of these different nominal versus real earnings that we've been doing, we really only care about the real rate of interest on this loan. So this is going to be the rate that describes how the real purchasing power of their funds is going to change over the course of that loan. And since interest rates are a result of supply and demand in the market for loanable funds, higher inflation rates are going to lead to higher nominal interest rates in order to compensate for the lenders losing some purchasing power. So the difference between the real and nominal interest rates is going to be the rate of inflation. The real interest rate is going to be related to the real purchasing power, and the nominal rate of interest is just going to be the stated interest rate on the loan. Now, the higher the level of inflation is, the higher the nominal interest rate is going to be, even when real interest rates are constant. So table 9.2 in your text gives you a couple of examples of these relationships. I would definitely mark down table 9.2 as something that you want to look at. And we'll talk about this difference in real and nominal here in just a minute. But this formula is kind of the basic thing that you know. We already learned how to calculate inflation rates, and you'll be given the inflation rate in a lot of these problems. But if you want to get the real interest rate, all you do is take the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. And depending on what pieces of information you have, if you only have the real interest rate and the inflation rate and you need the nominal interest rate, you just add those two together. So real interest rate plus inflation rate. And this is going to give you that nominal interest rate. So nominal is the interest rate that is written down on the loan and stated on the loan. The real interest rate is just the inflation-adjusted interest rate. This graphic is figure 9.4 from your book, and it's just kind of showing you a couple of takeaways that you should be able to take away from looking at this. We have our years on the x-axis, and we have the interest rates per year on this y-axis. You can see the blue line up top is the nominal interest rate. The real interest rate is this orange line on the bottom. And the gap between the two is just changes in inflation. So typically, the real interest rate is going to be a little bit lower than that nominal interest rate. Obviously, there's some exceptions to that. You can see here that recession that we talk about all the time in 2008, 2009, the real interest rate actually ended up being more expensive than that nominal interest rate. So if inflation is positive, the nominal interest rate is going to be greater than the real interest rate. So if inflation is positive and things are normal, nominal interest rate will always be higher than that real interest rate. If inflation is negative or deflation is occurring, like over here in this 2008 area, the real interest rate will be greater than the nominal interest rate. If inflation is positive but falling, which is called disinflation for the technical term, the nominal interest rate will still be greater than the real interest rate, but the gap between the two is going to be a lot closer. So like around this like 2005 point, you can see that this gap between the two lines is getting very small. That's an example of when disinflation is happening and inflation is falling. The difference between the real and the nominal interest rate is going to be your rate of inflation. So we've calculated inflation. We saw those formulas on the previous slide to, kind of calculate the different rates. Inflation is just that difference between the two. The experiences of the 1970s kind of shows us that nominal interest rates are historically high whenever inflation is also high. So over here, you can see in like the 1970s around this area, the nominal interest rate gets much further away from this real interest rate whenever inflation is very high. So I'll never ask you guys, obviously, in this class to create a graph or anything like that, but it's good to be able to look at these graphs and make some assumptions and take something away. So that's kind of the point of, going through these in class. Now, just a quick summary, the supply of loans is going to come from people saving money, and the interest rate is a reward for saving. The demand of loanable funds is going to come from people wanting to borrow money, and the interest rate is that cost of borrowing. Again, this is a really good summary slide to keep with you when you're working on your, homework assignments or your exam reviews and things like that. So definitely mark that down. But now we're going to kind of talk about, what happens on the supply side of the loanable funds. So what factors are going to shift the supply of loanable funds? I'm going to go ahead and pop this all up so we can talk about it. Now recall the interest rate is going to be that cost or price of borrowing. So movements along the curve occur whenever there's a change in the price or the interest rate, and shifts in the curve are going to occur when a change in a variable other than interest rate is happening that affects supply. This is really comparable to the goods in the market supply and demand models that we've looked at. Now for this, we have movement along the supply curve is just going to be changes in interest. So that's any movement along that line that we saw earlier. If the entire line jumps right or left, this can be because of changes in income and wealth, changes in time preferences, and consumption smoothing. So we'll talk specifically about each one of these but it's really very similar to our basic supply and demand model. Now for changes in income and wealth, let me go ahead and go back here. These are going to be graphed as a shift of the supply of loanable funds. So there's going to be a positive relationship between changes in income and wealth and saving. High-income people and countries are going to save more, obviously, and low-income people and countries are not going to save as much, even if the interest rate is exactly the same. When people save, they also want to save where the interest rate is the highest. So that's why a lot of foreign entities will go ahead and invest their savings in the United States, because as nations around the globe start to gain more wealth, they're going to want to save more too. Over the past couple of decades, there's been an increase in foreign savings, and this has specifically been targeted to the U.S. loanable funds market. And that's because whenever people save in the U.S. rather than some other countries, they're able to generate a higher return on that savings than they would in their home country. So all else being equal, an increase in your income is generally going to increase your savings. So if your income declines, you're typically going to save less. Think about that. If you get a new job and you get a raise and you're making more than you were before, you now have the ability and the opportunity to go ahead and save some more money. Whereas on the other hand, if you are laid off from a job, if you're furloughed, especially with like things that are going on now, you're probably not going to be saving as much as you once were. So time preferences are another big thing that can shift that supply of loanable funds. And the main question here that we're going to talk about a little bit more as we go is, would you rather have $50 now or $50 later? We know that loans are going to be paid back at a later date. And as compensation for using funds today, borrowers have to pay lenders. And the longer the loan period is, the higher the payment. As a lender, you have to kind of make that decision, or a saver. Do I want to save that money now, or do I want to go ahead and go out and spend that money? So there's two general rules of preference that you can kind of, write down, remember. One is that people prefer more to less, and two is that people prefer now to later. If you make someone wait later, you're going to have to compensate them by paying them more. These aren't really like novel or groundbreaking concepts. Obviously, all of us would probably agree that in most cases, more is better than less. And also in most cases, we'd much rather have that more now rather than waiting for later. So as somebody that's saving money, the interest that you're paid on saving that money, that's that compensation that you get for waiting for the later. Now, some more on time preferences. These are going to help determine the savings rate in society. So the savings rate is going to be calculated as personal saving as a portion of the disposable after-tax income. Abrupt changes in the overall savings rate are rare, but they're not really unprecedented. So what factors do you think prompt or prevent students from saving? Just from like your standpoint, if you don't have a lot of savings, what maybe like is a barrier to you being able to save a lot of money? And you don't have to be like, you don't have to like disclose anything personal that you don't want to talk about, but just in like very general terms, as a student, what kind of things make it hard for you to save money? And if you are a student that has a savings that's established, what kind of things are you doing, or what kind of things help you to save money? So I'll give you guys a chance to kind of comment those things in the box, but we'll go ahead and move on to this next slide because it does give a little bit more information on that kind of topic. So Alicia said, not being able to have a full-time work schedule. That is a big thing that does prevent students from being able to save. Now, it's not unheard of for students to work full-time and also go to school full-time, but for a lot of students, that's just simply not a reality that they can kind of afford. And so whenever you're not able to work full-time, you are going to be, missing out on some income that could potentially be savings. And then Eric said food and bills. Yeah, that's a big barrier for a lot of students as well, that as you're trying to pay for your kind of just generic living expenses, you don't necessarily always have the extra disposable income to put into savings. So the decision to attend college is what this example covers. Option 1 is get a job, and I'll go ahead and pop this all up. And option 2 is going to be go to college. So every year that you're in college, you could have earned some other form of income. The fact that you're a college student kind of demonstrates that you guys in general are going to be more patient than some other people that just go directly into the workforce and work on earning that income directly out of high school. The truly impatient are going to enter the workforce immediately so they can earn income and spend it on consumption. But college students typically will earn more than high school graduates when you do enter the workforce. So in the US, more schooling typically is going to lead to more income. And there's that trade-off between earning income and consuming it today, or, and delaying entering the workforce, or earning more income later and consuming later. So figure 9.5 in your book shows you kind of the average salary by education level. And basically it shows you that, the more educated you are, typically the more that you'll earn. Obviously, there's going to be some exceptions to this rule. Bill Gates, a college dropout that earns millions and millions a year. But on average, a worker with a basic college degree, so that could be an associate's in pretty much anything, is going to earn about $15,000 or more a year than those that didn't graduate from college. So Jessica also said, Sometimes you aren't able to work high-paying jobs before getting a degree, and that's very true. Now, do I think that necessarily just going to college makes you so much smarter than everyone and that's why businesses hire you? Absolutely not. Truly, I believe that a lot of businesses see you graduating from college as a demonstration of your ability to commit and stick with something through to the end. And they know, regardless of what that degree is in, they're going to give you their own training, but they know that you have the dedication to stick with something and see it through to the end, and that you're also teachable. So regardless of what your major is, obviously different majors are going to have different income levels. Getting that piece of paper from the college shows a business that you are trainable, you are teachable, and that you are able to commit to something and see it through to the end. So while you are foregoing maybe a full-time work schedule right now or higher paying job that you might be able to get right now, you are all investing in yourself so that in the future, you're able to get a better job and make more money that way. So great comments. Thank you for those. Here's a practice what you know. How will an increase in time preferences affect the loanable funds market? So remember, an increase in time preferences means that people are less patient. They're more impatient and they want more now rather than waiting for later. Very good. I see some answers coming in, and B is correct. If there's an increase in time preferences, that means that people are becoming more impatient. There will be a decrease in the supply of loanable funds. So yes, so Eric says a high time preference is the now, while the low time preference is the wait. That is absolutely correct. If there's an increase in time preference, it means that we prefer it right now. If there's a decrease in time preference, that means that we don't really care as much. We can wait, we can save. We don't really have something we want to consume right now. So as that increase happens in the time preference, today's spending is going to increase and savings will decrease today. And this decrease in savings will cause a decrease in that loanable funds supply market. So very good answers, very good observations. Now, consumption smoothing, this is another thing that can shift the supply of loanable funds. Young students and elderly retirees typically won't work, but most people do earn income in between those years. So young people and retirees, even though they're not typically earning a lot of income, they're still going to be consuming goods and services. Individuals have to pay to consume goods and services during this time, sometimes by borrowing or using savings. And what that means is, even though you're maybe not making a lot of money to save, you still have expenses that you have to pay for. And sometimes to pay for those expenses, you have to get loans. A good example of that is student loans in college. That is an example of having to borrow to be able to pay. People generally like to smooth consumption over the life cycle. So consider your current situation. College students in general typically are going to spend more than they earn in income. So this can be things like tuition, room and board if you're at a bigger university, food that you have to eat, beer, any kind of extra thing that you're having to buy. And this is typically going to be more than what you're earning in income. While some of this deficit is going to be funded by maybe help from your parents, a lot of the difference is often going to be financed by borrowing. So sometimes you're able to get scholarships and things like that. But if you aren't, fortunate enough to have parents that can help you pay for college and things like that, it's likely that you have to borrow. So sometime after you graduate and get a job, a lot of people are going to buy a house. Whenever you buy a house, typically people are going to borrow again. So early in a typical life, consumption is going to be less than income. And we kind of bridge that gap with borrowing. We take out student loans, we take out a home loan, we get a mortgage, like all these different things. In terms of the market for loanable funds, savings is going to be highest when people are in midlife. So there's generally a stable flow of people that are moving in and out of the labor force, but there's very little or no effect on savings in the market of loanable funds. If a significant population portion leaves their prime earning years at the same time, savings is going to fall. So that would be like a mass retirement. And we're going to cover this kind of more on the coming slide. We'll sort of illustrate it graphically. But just keep in mind the main takeaway here is that the younger that you are earlier in your life, you typically are going to consume more than you earn. Midlife, once people are done with college and they're kind of established in their career, that's when people typically do the most savings. And then once you move into retirement, you again begin to consume more than what you're financed with using up your savings, like most retirees do, or borrowing, like a lot of college students do. That's what consumption smoothing is. It's kind of bridging that gap between income and consumption with borrowing. So this is figure 9.6 from your book. In this figure, we have the vertical distance between income and consumption is kind of our picture of borrowing. Our horizontal axis is going to be where we're at in our life. And then this vertical axis or the y-axis is going to be our income consumption. So the income is going to reach its highest level during midlife. This is going to be our prime earning years. And this is typically when we're able to pay off loans from early in life and save for retirement. So kind of middle age is when our income tends to peak. The second click here is going to show that this, second thing here, this is the time when income is going to exceed consumption. So these prime earning years, your income is going to be, you're making more than what you're consuming or spending. That's what's going on right here. This third click is kind of showing borrowing. So that's shaded in right here. You can see the consumption line is higher than that income line, and that's where we kind of bridge that gap or consumption smooth by borrowing some money. This next click is showing you where savings comes in. So once our income starts to become more than our consumption, we're able to save some money. And then later in life, we have what's called dis-saving, which basically just means that as you retire and things like that, you go ahead and start to live off your savings. So you're not really saving anymore because you're using that savings to maintain your lifestyle. So in the basic consumption smoothing model, when are consumers dis-saving? Wonderful. I see some answers starting to come in, and that is correct. The correct answer here is D. It's going to be later in life whenever you start to dis-save because you're now living off your savings in your retirement years. So here is figure 9.7. The x-axis here is going to be your savings in billions of dollars for the entire loanable funds market. And this y-axis is going to be your interest rate. The first click is going to show you S1. This is that normal supply curve or the savings for that loanable funds. The second click here is showing you a shift in the curve. So remember, changes in interest rates would have just been movements along this original S1 curve, but S2 represents an actual shift in the curve. It's going out to the right because this is showing us an increase in the supply of loanable funds that happened because of something other than a change in the interest rate. In this case, this could be increased wealth, a decrease in time preference, aka people prefer more later instead of now. This could occur because of an increase in the amount of the population that's in the savings portion of their lifetime consumption smoothing stage. So a shift to the right of this savings curve is showing an increase in people saving and an increase of savings available for that loanable funds market that is not related to changes in interest rates. Now this third click, this is showing you kind of the opposite end of that. You can see that this is a shift to the left to S3, and this is a decrease in the supply of loanable funds that's occurring because of something other than a change in the overall interest rate. This could be a decrease in wealth, so less people are making money, less people are saving. This could be an increase in time preferences, aka people want more now rather than later. Or it could be a decrease in the amount of the population that's in the savings part of their lifetime consumption smoothing. So alternatively, more people are in the borrowing or dis-saving part of life. This could be like, a lot of baby boomers retiring, so they're not really in that high income generating stage of their life anymore and they're living off their savings. It could be a large group of people that are going into college that are now in that borrowing phase of their life. So whatever it may be, it means that there's a decrease in the supply of loanable funds, and it's because of something other than that interest rate. So just to give you an example that we've kind of already talked about a little bit, but we do have a bubble in our current population that's known as the baby boomers, or more affectionately, your moms and dads. And from 1946 to 1964, there was a really identifiable increase in the US birth rates, and this led to a really larger than normal population for these years, and that is baby boomers. So with normal retirement age at 65, the oldest baby boomers really started retiring in 2011. So, 10, 15 years from 2011, a lot of these US workers are going to enter retirement in record numbers. Excel, for example, they even have information on their website stating that like 60% of their workforce is of retirement age in these next couple of years. And that is a lot more people retiring than usual. And that will definitely be a jump over here, a shift to the left, because that loanable funds market, the supply will go down. And it's not because interest rates are changing, it's because there's a large population of people that are leaving that saving portion of their life and moving into that dissaving portion. So this is a mass exit from those prime earning years, and consequently, it's going to be less savings. And this is that shift from S1 to S3, just to give you kind of a brief example there. This chart just really summarizes the slope and the shift of the supply of loanable funds. So it kind of tells you like what's going on here, the factors, income and wealth, time preferences, consumption smoothing. It tells you the direction. Is it positive? Is it negative? And it tells you the explanation. This is just kind of a really good summary of everything that we've talked about in the last couple of slides. So definitely earmark, this is slide 29. And this is something that you can absolutely use on your exam to help you do a little better on those questions. So just kind of a little note there. Now, figure 9.8, this is just showing you that the savings rate in the United States has fallen pretty consistently for about 30 years. And this began in the early 1980s. We have our savings rate over here on the y-axis and our years, so our timeline on the x-axis. And you can see that there is kind of a downward overall trend in that savings rate. And this is showing savings since 1969. So in 1980, our savings rate was over 10%. The decline continued until about 2005, whenever our savings rate bottomed out over here at only about 1.4%. So this is averages for the year, so it doesn't get all the way quite down that low on this chart. The reason for this decline in savings is really unclear. We don't know exactly what caused people to stop saving as much. We can maybe guess that people's time preferences increased, they wanted more things, or maybe the baby boomers were just less patient than their parents. We don't really know. But all else being equal, this decline in savings rate really is going to shift back, so shift to the left, that supply of loanable funds. So what do you guys think could possibly be causing this decline in savings in the United States? Like, why do you think that people are saving less now than we did in like around 1960s? Or what do you think makes people spend their money at a faster rate than what we used to in the past? So as y'all kind of type some comments on that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next part of this lecture. So on the other side of what we've talked about now, we have that demand for loanable funds. Remember, this is going to be the people that are borrowing. Long before the revenue arrives from sales, businesses are going to have to borrow to be able to produce. These funds are borrowed from that loanable funds market, and these loans to finance investment are going to be the primary source of demand for loanable funds. So I see Eric said, the economy will heave when the boomers retire. At least that's what I've been told. It can definitely happen. Jessica says prices have gone up. We know that, nominal prices have gone up, but real prices haven't actually had much of a change. But that can definitely be something that promotes, prompts people to save less, because if they're just seeing those nominal increases in price, they can definitely take that as a reason to not save as much money because it costs more upfront to pay for things. So good answers there, guys. Now, what factors are going to shift the demand of loanable funds? Remember, movement along the loanable funds curve would be just changes in interest. Shifting the curve would be these different changes that happen that are not related to interest. So, things that can shift the demand for loanable funds, this can be changes in the productivity of capital or changes in investor confidence. Let's see, Mario said, an increase in time preferences. Absolutely. People can just be a lot more impatient than they were back then. And then Eric said, pay now for a product that will get more expensive in the future. That's also something. I don't know if any of you guys are old enough to really remember, but I'm sure there's something kind of similar. But Furbies, that could be a reason people are saving less. Things like Furbies. You think that this item, or Beanie Babies might be a better one. You think that this thing is going to be worth a lot more in the future, so you spend all your savings on, Furbies or Beanie Babies. Most of those people are not very happy now unless they had very rare Beanie Babies. But it's just all really perception, right? What do we think is going to be something that will earn us more money in the future? So good job. Those are good answers as well. Now, moving on to those shifts in the demand for loanable funds, we have the productivity of capital and investor confidence. So on the productivity of capital, we're going to talk about what causes these shifts. We'll kind of first consider the impact of the internet. Obviously, you guys have connection to the internet, you have quick access to data, and you have network capabilities that people really only dreamed about 20 years ago. They didn't have the access that we have. It's kind of hard to really imagine now, but maps, travel arrangements, job searches, data research, all of these things we used to do like completely without the internet's help. So, obviously I'm not like that old either. So I have kind of, grown up with technology as well. But even just like 10 years ago, technology was really nowhere even close to what it is today. So, completing these tasks without the internet is a lot harder than doing them, online maps, online travel prices, online data and search. The internet really makes computers better. So this is kind of an improvement, the productivity of capital, that can shift that demand for loanable funds. The images on the slide, obviously a cordless drill. This is a lot more productive than a screwdriver. And higher productivity from our capital means that our demand to borrow more funds might grow, because we know that expanding our business could be a lot more profitable, than it would have been before. Now, on the right-hand side of this slide, we talk about investor confidence. This is a really common phrase that's used in the media, so you've probably heard it outside of an economics class. So think like, Fox, CNBC, all of these. Whenever firms are optimistic, they expect that the economy is going to grow in the future, and they're a lot more inclined to borrow today if expected profits tomorrow are going to be large. We've mentioned this a little bit before, but Keynes basically coined the term animal spirits, and this is implying that investment demand really isn't even based on real factors. It's really kind of based on what investors think. Do they think things are going to be great? Do they think things are going to go badly? And that's really going to impact how much people are really willing and want to borrow, depending on how much they think they'll be able to get back on that investment. So let's go ahead and move on here. This is figure 9.9. We have our investment on the x-axis as usual, our interest rates on the y-axis. And this first click is just kind of showing you our normal demand curve for loanable funds. So this is the normal curve. And if we had changes in the interest rate, we would just have movement along this one curve. Now, the shift to the right with D2, this is an increase in the demand of loanable funds, and it's going to be represented by that shift to the right from D1 to D2. And what could have caused this would be an increase in capital productivity. So like the invention of the internet, people being able to, use powered tools instead of basic tools, or an increase in investor confidence. So if people think that things are going well and investors are feeling confident, those animal spirits are high, then we're going to have this shift over here to D2. That means that more people are wanting to borrow. Now this shift to D3, this is going to be the opposite end of that. This is a decrease in the demand for loanable funds, and that's that shift from D1 to D3. And some things that could cause this would be a decrease in capital productivity or a decrease in investor confidence. So with the current state of things right now, with the pandemic going on and all the uncertainty, do you think that we're going to see a rightward shift from D1 to D2? Or do you think that it's more likely that we'll see a leftward shift from D1 to D3? What do you think? Are we going to go to D2 or to D3? What is likely here? And I'll give you guys a second to answer that before we move on. And remember, we're talking about people borrowing to expand businesses or to invest in new capital for businesses. So do you guys think that there will be more people that are wanting to invest and expand their businesses right now, or less people wanting to expand and invest in businesses right now? Yeah, so Jessica says less, a shift to the left. That is what is likely to happen right now. Now, this is a little bit confusing because a lot of people will see this and think, okay, well, if people are making less money, they might have to borrow more. But we're just talking in general terms of firms investing in expanding their businesses and investing in new technology. It is very likely that we will see a shift from D1 to D3, and we're actually kind of already experiencing that shift because there's a lot less people that are, really wanting to go out and get a business loan to start a new business right now than whenever conditions are normal. And that's just because there is a lot of uncertainty happening right now. So very good, Jessica. Oh, thank you for answering that. Sorry, I muted myself. Still not really great at being a famous YouTuber, so, take it as it comes. We're not going to watch this, but if you want the link, as always, let me know. I'll give it to you. So that, Jessica asked, would that on the last slide be a lower supply of loanable funds? So in this case, no. We're looking at the demand for loanable funds. So this is the demand of people that are wanting to borrow those funds. This is saying that there is less people that are looking to borrow for business loans and things like that. Whenever that supply curve that was the other way shifted to the left, that's when there's a lower supply of loanable funds. And that's also something that's likely to happen because as we're under lockdowns and, a lot of businesses aren't open, there's going to be a lot more people dipping into their savings than there were before. And there's going to be a lot less people that have the ability to save. So there will also be a leftward shift of that supply of loanable funds. But this particular slide, we're just looking at the demand side. So wonderful question. Thank you for asking that. Now this is for your 9.10 in your book. And it's kind of talking about the equilibrium of the loanable funds market. And this is just when those two lines are lining up with each other. So that equilibrium point here is, again, just where those two lines cross. It's when the quantity supplied of loanable funds is equal to the quantity demanded and savings is exactly equal to investment. This isn't something that typically happens because we don't always hit those perfect numbers, but it's ideal, right? So in equilibrium, savings is equal to investment. The supply of loanable funds is savings. The demand of loanable funds is firms that are wanting to borrow. And the relationship between saving and borrowing is that every dollar borrowed requires a dollar saved. Now, it's not 100% realistic to hit this equilibrium point, but it's kind of where the market naturally wants to go, and it is our kind of ideal space. So what is true about the equilibrium in the market for loanable funds? I'll give you guys a second to answer this before we move on. So I see a lot of answers coming in. Very good. That correct answer is A. So the loanable funds equilibrium is when savings is exactly equal to investment. So very good. Great job, guys. Now, a decline in investor confidence is a big deal, and it has a really big effect on that loanable funds market. I'm going to go ahead and pop this slide up, and then we'll talk about it here in just a second. But investor confidence tends to decline whenever the economy slows down. Firms know that they're going to have reduced sales. Investors know that they're going to be getting less return on their investment. And the model predicts that this is going to result in a lower level investment and a lower interest rate. So historically, investment fell during both U.S. recessions between 2000 and 2012. And typically, what I'm guessing and what is likely to happen right now is that this decline in investor confidence that's currently happening is going to have pretty much the same effect. If you feel less confident that you're going to get your investment returned, you're not going to be spending money or even saving money to loan out to other people. So our current state, it is very likely that this is going to have an impact on that loanable funds market. So this is figure 9.11 in your book. And this first click here is going to show you that savings curve in our loanable funds market. And then the second curve right here is going to show you what the demand for loanable funds was in 2007. This third click shows you our original interest rate and our original investment. So our original equilibrium right here in 2007. Now this next click shows 2008's demand curve. You can see there was a shift to the left because investor confidence had gone down and people were not wanting to borrow as much because they didn't think that they would be able to get that return back on their investment. This decreases interest rates and also causes a decline in savings and investment. So that's kind of like the consequences here. Now, when decision makers at firms are going to lose confidence in the future direction of the economy, they're going to stop investing as much. This is going to lead to lower investment, savings, and interest rates. And then panel B over here, that's this like right-hand side of this slide, real investment declined during both of our recessions between 2000 and 2012. So you can see right here the shaded recession, that investment is going down, and then also shaded recession, investment went way down. It's very likely that in our current state, if we look 5-10 years from today, that there is going to be another very significant drop here because there's probably not a lot of really confident businesses right now, except for maybe the toilet paper industry. They might be investing in new technology right now, but everyone else not very confident. So the future of the loanable funds market, this is kind of a funny slide because, the future is always changing. And this textbook is a little older. We are switching to a new edition next semester, but they're not quite, on the cutting edge here. But there's been a fall in the savings rate over the past 30 years. We already know that. And then we have this retirement of baby boomers that's looming. So the first scenario, this is going to represent a leftward shift followed by a rightward supply shift. The second scenario, this retirement of baby boomers, this is just a leftward supply shift. So in this case, interest rates are going to go up and investment's going to go down, and all else being equal, this means that there will be a reduced investment and reduced GDP growth in the future, just with relation to the retirement of baby boomers. So just kind of a little peek into the future there. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever seen the movie Confessions of a Shopaholic from 2009, but there is some economics in pretty much any movie you watch, and this is the example they chose from your book. And I do have a link to this clip if you ever did want to watch it, but basically there's a scene where Becky, the main character, almost ruins a Shopaholics Anonymous meeting. Basically, she shops too much. And in this clip, it kind of talks about consumption smoothing, debt, time preferences, and credit markets. It's really just kind of a silly little thing. If you're interested, let me know. I'll send it to you. But just to kind of wrap things up, this is a two-part conclusion because this is such a big chapter. The loanable funds market channels funds from savers to borrowers. The supply of loanable funds is going to be household savings or foreign people that are saving their money here. And suppliers are going to provide these funds for firms to expand through investment. And this is really important for our economic growth. The quantity of loanable funds supplied is positively related to the interest rate. So remember, the more interest that you're able to earn on your investment, the more likely you are to save. Supply is going to increase the more that you're making, but it's also going to be impacted by consumption smoothing and your time preferences. So do you want more now? Do you have the patience to wait for later? The demand for loanable funds, this is going to be the loans to firms that are going to borrow to invest in capital that's going to help them, produce more in the future and increase future GDP. The quantity of the loanable funds demanded is going to be negatively related to that interest rate. So remember, this means that the higher the interest rate is, the less people are going to want to borrow because we don't want to pay a lot. That makes the cost of borrowing more expensive. Demand is going to increase with capital productivity and investor confidence. So the better that we feel about the economy, the more that technology advances and things like that, the more likely firms are to demand to borrow funds because the return on that investment is going to be higher. And then that equilibrium point where those two lines meet, this is going to determine the level of savings, investment, and interest rates. So this is a very large chapter, but it's really very comparable to the supply and demand concepts that we've already covered. If you guys have any questions, please go ahead and feel free to type those in the comment box, and I'll stay on to address those. But please do remember to take your exam and get that Chapter 8 Inquisitive done. I'll have your exams graded and curved before we meet again on Tuesday. And I'll also go ahead and have those Chapter 9 participation grades updated before our class time on Tuesday. So once we do get to class on Tuesday, you will have completely updated and current grades. If you are taking your exam and you happen to come across a question that you think maybe isn't correct or anything like that, as always, like absolutely email these to me. You know, the book is not perfect, so there are sometimes these things that do happen, but if you don't tell me about it, then I can't help you and fix it. So take a picture if you think that, you know, the question might be off, and I'm definitely willing to look at those. I don't think there are any that are not correct in this exam, but I mean, you know, it could always happen. So let me know. And other than that, I hope you guys have a great weekend. I hope that you're staying safe. I'm so proud of you guys for sticking it out. We're halfway there, so hang in there, and the end of the semester will be here before you know it. And if there's no questions, I'm going to go ahead and end this broadcast. The link will be posted in that Week 4 folder. Thank you guys again, and I will talk with you on Tuesday.